The railings, some of those could be repainted, some had to be repaired, some had to be replaced. The mechanical components, some of the metal portions of the gates, valve assemblies, turnstiles that you see there. But most of that equipment, very little of it had to be replaced. Most of it was just refurbished and repaired, put back on site. The timber gates, they were repaired in a whole. What we did is we used the old gates as a pattern, came back in, ordered new timbers, and reinstalled those gates. And you see kind of the installation process where they're going on it timber by timber, similar to what the Corps of Engineers did throughout the years. And the keeper shelters. You'll see up on the left it's pretty deteriorated and goes in and makes a determination as to what can be repaired and what might be replaced. Up to this point in time at least, those shelters were in such rough shape that we actually did a replica of them. And you can see what those shelters look like. And in order to maintain the historic integrity of the site and so forth, they were allowed to do that. But again, where we could repair those, they were repaired. Light standards. Again, the period of significance comes into play. The light standards that you see here changed over a period of years. The most recent ones were put in, I think, in the 60s. They were aluminum poles that came up, and they had a kind of a light standard on top. Went back in and replaced those with some that were there during the 30s and before. So that was a modification. And then we have an awful lot of masonry walls through the system, not only on the locks and on the lock approaches, but the canals. For example, the canal out here that goes from lock 1 down to lock 2 and so forth. You'll see them now. There's rip-wrapping and stone, and in some areas there's some masonry walls. A lot of that stuff almost looks in a natural state. When the canals were built, those were all stone lined. When you looked down there weren't trees on the side. They were stone, laid up stone walls, and pretty much throughout the whole system, that's what the canals looked like. They just deteriorated over time. They weren't maintained, and a lot of those walls kind of fell in and then were rip-wrapped over or just left to go natural. And I'll turn it back, I think, to Ann here. You can see we're talking again about the enhancement of the system through time and some of the uses of the system. And there were recreational uses even historically when there was still freight traffic on the system. But then eventually the freight traffic fell off.
I think in this image, I'd really like to point out the completion photos on the side of the screen. You're looking at the fully restored locks. I don't think these are Appleton. I think this may actually be Little Chute, but at any rate. And I think the point is we can see in the historic images sort of the vitality and the fun and the interest in the recreational opportunities on the river and how exciting it is that potential is now coming back into play for all communities, Appleton particularly. So how will Appleton benefit? We'd like to get into a kind of a more specific discussion. I think in just the course of time that I've been involved with the lock project, I've really come to believe that a restored navigational system could have international appeal as a tourism designation. I post a lot of my process photos on Flickr just for fun, and I've heard from people, comments from across Europe. Is the system operating? These are great pictures. We've never seen an American lock system. I think that's really, really interesting and something that would be a huge benefit for this whole area of northeastern Wisconsin. I think, too, that this is all going hand in hand with the commitment that industry and the DNR has made to clean up the Fox River, which is huge. You know, as a kid growing up here, we turned our backs to the river. It had zero recreation potential. And now that people are beginning to look at it as a place to play and live, that's another piece of the puzzle that could certainly be both a cultural and economic enhancement. So, and I think I'm going to turn it back to Harlan. Sort of our next slide, Liz, please, is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, and that's
just like to make a couple brief statements on this. And I think the site plan has changed a little bit recently on this. There was just an announcement, I think, yesterday or the day before about the first phase of this project starting. This is down on John Street, down near block number 4, which you see up at the top. And this is the River Heath development that will be going in on an abandoned industrial parcel. It is one area of redevelopment that is capitalizing not only on the river system but on the lock system. There's going to be some boat mooring and abilities along with this project as far as day trippers that will stop for the area. I'm not sure there could be any in for the residential people.
Is that what was circled in yellow on the last one?
Yes, that's the site. That's this particular site here.
Right.
And that's where some of the industrial buildings are still in there. They've been torn down in the reconstruction. If you stay on this slide just for a second, you look up at the upper left corner, that's the old Foremost property. You just right on that one too, that's starting very shortly, there'll be some residential in there. Got waterfront as well, so that's some more waterfront property in the vicinity of the dams and the locks and sort of capitalizing on ambience in the area. Okay. We go to the next slide too. And if we don't show it on here, but there are a couple of other projects I just want to mention. And one of them, you can just go down the block here, you can see that's the Eagle Flats project. That's another one that's being constructed at this point in time. Again, there will be some mooring abilities there. It's on the waterfront. It involves some of our property as well, and doing cooperative efforts with the developer, with the city on that project as well. So there are a number of redevelopment sites along the river that are capitalizing on river qualities, on some of the historic aspects of the river, and of course the recreational navigational benefits. And again, what we're looking at here is really a restored system which will allow navigation on the system and the full experience of what we had when the lock system was in its heyday. What is the current status of the locks? You can see here where the locks are at this point in time. And essentially, there are 3 locks that have been operating continuously since the 1850s. And those locks are in Menasha, Little Rapids, or Little Capona, and De Pere. And our navigation season runs from May till October. And those are open approximately from 10 to 10 and longer on weekends and holidays for the boaters to use. We have limited operation in Appleton here now. This summer has been on weekends. We're hoping that as we gain more use and as the system continues to open, that we'll be able to expand the operation of those particular locks. We have locks that are restored in Little Chute at this point in time. The Cedars lock is one that operates along with the Appleton right now. But the combined locks and Little Chute locks have been restored but are non-operational because of a bridge situation in Little Chute, where the village is going to be replacing the drawbridge. We're looking at about 3 years yet before that's completed. And then we have 5 locks in Capona. And those locks, 2 of them are being reconstructed this year. There'll be another one next year, and then in succeeding years, the next couple will be done. And then we have at the Rapid Approach a Lamprey area, and that lock has been closed since 1988. And that lock will not be opened as a formal lock. And what's proposed eventually to go in there is what's called a boat lift. And I won't get into that now. There's a number of issues that go along with the development of that particular boat lift. But that's further down the road. So even when the locks are all completed here, there will still be, for a period of time, there will be a barrier between Lake Winnebago and Green Bay at the Rapid Approach lock. You want to talk about the lock in their houses?
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks. neighbors actually had residences. And we've identified basically two different types of houses that were constructed along the waterway for the use of lock keepers. The more, I guess, typically associated house has the Dutch gambrel roof. It's sort of a Dutch colonial. There's the house up on the upper right that's kind of right in the village of Little Chute, adjacent to the garden walk there. But it's located on a city street, which is somewhat unusual. At the bottom, we have the De Pere house of the same style. This is the house at Kekona 1, and it's very similar to the house at Appleton 1, and these are a slightly older vintage. What's really exciting about the houses is we're looking at them as possible features along the waterway once everything's back up and running, and as a component that might be utilized as part of an interpretive plan for any number of reasons. A couple of studies have been done. An HSR is being completed right now on the Little Chute house that is calling up some code issues and things like that are going to be really excellent to be aware of moving forward. But right now, we're really looking at ways they were stabilized through DOT funding last summer, and right now we're really looking at different ways to utilize that as an enhancement to the waterway and primarily the use of people engaging in recreational activities. I'll just make one small comment about the Parkway before turning it back to Harlan, because he has been involved in this since its very earliest inception. But the Fox Wisconsin Heritage Parkway is a new group that's kind of a spin out of Friends of the Fox and East Central Planning. And they've really motivated and pulled together some funds and developed a beautiful website, and they're really, really behind pushing for this federal designation of the Heritage Parkway for the Wisconsin and Fox Rivers. So I'm delighted to be working with this group as it moves forward on an interpretive master plan for the area, more than I can say. But I'd like to turn it back to Harlan because he was pivotal to getting all of this going 2 decades ago.
Okay, thank you, Ann. If you look up in the left-hand corner, you see the Fox Wisconsin Heritage Parkway logo, and I have to say that many people were involved in this whole process for almost 30 years now. We started in the late 80s. And one of the people that was a key instrument in the development of that logo is sitting in one of the rows back here, Val Wiley. I think most of you know Val. And she was one of the many committee people, but she was one of the executive committee members. And there were a number of logos that were looked at early on, and that particular one was chosen at that point. It's been around on a number of publications since probably the early 1990s. But again, many people were involved. Friends of the Fox, of course, has been an advocate for this system actually from the early 1980s, and they've been a big supporter and pusher of the Heritage Parkway concept at this point. But it finally looks like it's coming to fruition, and it's something that's been in the works for many years. One of the things that came up early on in the 90s when this concept was first looked at was the fact that what was going to happen to the lock system. And at that point in time, in the early 1990s, it looked for a while that the lock system would essentially be gotten rid of, that the locks would be filled in, that most of them, perhaps maybe the Menasha lock wouldn't be, but most of them would be abandoned, and there would be no lock system. And there were some studies that looked at the possibility of doing that. And then there was some additional studies that looked at what are the costs of restoring and what would happen, how would we go about restoring and maintaining these locks and still being able to operate them indefinitely. And there were a lot of negotiations and a lot of people over the years involved in that. What had happened was the negotiations centered around the transfer